Okay, our third and final talk for this session will be given by Dr. Mulawa. She carries the distinction of being a postdoctoral scholar on our interdisciplinary research training grant, and she will be presenting her work on the structural network position and performance of health leaders within a HIV prevention trial. Dr. Mulawa.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this research. And I must acknowledge that this work was done in collaboration with Nina Yamanis at American University, Lusajo Kajula at the Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Suzanne Maman at UNC. So as a background, peer leaders are used in HIV prevention interventions. They're recruited and trained to try to attempt to change the attitudes, the beliefs, and the behaviors of others. And this has been a pretty fruitful HIV prevention intervention approach, right? They've been used in many different types of populations, ranging from school-based youth, substance users, sex workers, men who have sex with men, and others. And meta-analyses show that the use of peer leaders can be quite effective in improving HIV-related knowledge, increasing condom use, and decreasing risk behaviors like equipment sharing among injecting drug users. So I consider the role of structural network position when thinking about the effectiveness of peer leaders. While emerging research suggests that the effectiveness of peer leaders may really depend on the position that they occupy within their social networks, right? So the effectiveness of peer leaders who are very central in their location within their network, those who are very popular, have many incoming ties to them, might be constrained because of their relationship to others in their network, compared to those who occupy a different position, namely those who bridge subgroups of individuals that are otherwise minimally connected. So in the visual here, you see the popular example, right? Those that are very highly central, high in degree centrality. You can see I've color-coded a node Jill, who's very central in her network. This is the connections among the individuals here. You can see she has many ties directly to her. So this emerging research shows that Jill, if she were a health leader, might be more constrained in her ability to be a peer leader. If she were asked to talk about controversial subjects or sensitive topics, she might feel pressure based on her position in her network and trying to maintain her popularity to engage in those activities. Compared to someone who has a different type of centrality, betweenness centrality, which is that type of position where you're bridging otherwise minimally connected subgroups. I've highlighted Liz here. Some of this emerging research suggests that a position like Liz, where she has high betweenness centrality, bridging otherwise minimally connected groups, may have more freedom because she's less constrained by trying to maintain her popularity within that network. So we wanted to see whether this played out in research that we had ongoing in Tanzania. So the setting for this research is in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, the commercial capital of Tanzania, an area characterized by high levels of population growth, high levels of unemployment, and about 70% of city residents end up living in informal settlements, as you see depicted here. The data come from an NIMH-funded R1 that's called Vijana Viju 2. It's led by Suzanne Maman at UNC, and this was a cluster randomized intervention trial. So we weren't randomizing individuals to an intervention or control, but clusters. And the clusters in this trial were social networks. They were peer groups that I'll describe a little bit later, but they call themselves camps. The intervention that we were delivering to these clusters of networks was a peer leader-based health leadership intervention. We also did a microfinance intervention in those camps, but this is really focused on the health leadership part. We were hoping to reduce STI incidents as well as the perpetration of physical and sexual intimate partner violence amongst female partners. So the camps. These were the clusters in this trial. So what are camps? Well, camps in DAR are naturally occurring phenomenon of mostly men. About 85% of camp members are men in DAR, and they form to, in this context of high unemployment, socialize, support one another. Most camp members tell us they go to these camps every day. They usually have a physical location where they demarcate their camp membership. Sometimes they go there to play pool, as you see depicted here, or play soccer, more common. And sometimes they have business enterprises as a camp as well. So as a first part of the R01, we first set out to enumerate all of the camps in 4 wards, about 4 US Census tracts of Dar es Salaam. And we did this during community informant interviews. We mapped all of them, and we found 294 camps within 4 wards of Dar es Salaam. And then we randomly selected 60 of them for participation in this trial. Now, once we had the 60 camps, we approached the chairman or the secretary, most of these have a formal leadership structure, and asked them for a roster, a list of who was a member within their camp to give us a census of all these camps. So once we had the rosters, we had to approach all of those individuals. We had over 1,500 men that were identified on the rosters and assess their own individual level eligibility based on age, how long they planned to live in Dar, how long they had been a camp member. And then invite them to participate in the trial. And we got about 80% of them to enroll in the study at baseline, and we followed them again at 12 months, and we retained about 78% of them for the 12-month assessment. So in addition to assessing various behaviors, we also did a big sociocentric network enumeration. So we showed them on a tablet their roster for their camp, and for every person we asked them, do you know this person? And then if so, is this person a friend, an acquaintance, or somebody you don't get along with? And then we also asked them, who are your 3 closest friends within that network? So we could really map the structure of those networks as well. So after we did the baseline assessment, we then moved on to this health leadership intervention, right? So how did we select those health leaders? Well, in the 30 camps that were randomized to the intervention arm, we held camp meetings, and we talked about what are characteristics of leaders? What types of things should we look for in someone who's a leader? And then we asked the camp members to each nominate up to 3 people who had those characteristics. We tallied them up, invited those with the most nominations to be health leaders in our intervention, and we sought to recruit about 20% of the camp size as health leaders. There was 180 eligible men that were nominated. Most of them, 94%, came to the training, they completed it. And then at the 12-month assessment, we retained 153, so about 90% at the follow-up. So in this analysis I mentioned, I was interested in looking at how is structural network position associated with the performance of these health leaders. So we wanted to look at the different structural network positions, that in-degree centrality, that sense of popularity, and that betweenness centrality, whether these people bridge subgroups of otherwise minimally connected groups. And then to look at association with their performance as a health leader. So for performance, we had 2 measures. We had the total number of past week conversations that they reported at that 12-month assessment about HIV, and as well as gender-based violence. So that was a big component of our training and what we wanted them to be doing. And then we also asked them about their confidence on a 1 to 4 point scale in engaging in both of those conversation topics. So our hypotheses here were based on this emerging research and some theory that suggested that as that in-degree centrality or popularity increases, we actually expected that these individuals would have a lower confidence and report fewer conversations about gender-based violence and HIV because of this position that they occupy, that they might feel constrained by being popular and having to conform to the norms of their group, and they might not be as effective in their roles. Compared to those that had higher betweenness centrality, we thought they might be more free, have more confidence, and report more conversations. Oops. So we used iGraph in R to compute the measures of in-degree centrality and betweenness for all these individuals. And you can see in the network here, this is a network of the closest friendship networks in one camp. And the yellow nodes are those that were the health leaders. They were selected by their peers to be health leaders. And you can just get a sense of some varying degrees of network position that we had. So the node in blue there is very popular. He's nominated by lots of individuals as being their closest friend, very central. Whereas the node in green has less direct ties, but does a better job at bridging otherwise minimally connected parts of the network. We use general estimating equations then to look at that as a predictor of their performance, and we controlled for different variables both at the individual level and the camp level in general, at the camp structure, like friendship density and all friendship reciprocity, that we know to be associated with different structural characteristics. So among these 153 health leaders that we had, in general, their characteristics was very much in line with the other camp members. So most of them were male, they were fairly young, most of them had only completed primary school or less, had not been married. And when you looked at their confidence, they were fairly confident on a scale of 1 to 4 in engaging in conversations about HIV and gender-based violence. But in terms of the number of conversations, they were somewhere between 1 and 9 on average. So when we looked at predictors of their number of conversations, we ran separate models for HIV and separate models for the gender-based violence. And after controlling for the individual level and camp level variables, what we found when we looked at the structural network position was really in line with our hypotheses. So as in-degree centrality, or that level of popularity, increased, as we expected, camp health leaders were reporting fewer conversations about HIV. That reached statistical significance. For the gender-based violence, the pattern, the relationship was also negative, meaning they also reported fewer conversations about gender-based violence as their popularity increased. And for betweenness centrality, as that position increased, they reported more conversations. So again, this was in line with our hypotheses. When we looked at confidence, however, the same structure, the pattern of relationship was changed. Individuals who were more central in their networks had higher levels of increasing in-degree centrality, reported greater confidence. And those with higher levels of betweenness centrality reported, were associated with less confidence in educating their peers. So we think this might be more characteristics of their characteristics as individuals who are popular tend to be more confident, and didn't really serve as a potential mediator of this intervention effect. So in sum, what did we learn? In our data, we learned that as in-degree centrality increased, the health leaders were reporting fewer conversations about HIV-related topics. And this is interesting because those popular individuals have more friends. They have more ties and more people that they could be engaging. But based on this idea that maybe they were feeling constrained by the norms in their networks, they weren't really bringing up these conversations as much as we would like. As betweenness centrality, or this kind of unique position of being bridging, position within the networks, as that increased, we did find that individuals were more likely to report, engaging in more conversations about sensitive topics like gender-based violence. More work is needed to understand the mechanisms of these relationships. But I think based on some of the preliminary research that we found and others have, seems like peer leaders who are occupying these spaces of bridging high betweenness centrality, they might be more effective in engaging their peers about controversial topics because they feel less constrained. And trying to map these networks and using the network structure to then strategically recruit those individuals as peer leaders in HIV intervention approaches may be a way to maximize the effectiveness of this intervention approach moving forward. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
Sorry, I'm over here. I was just curious. This is fascinating to me. I was just curious. Were you able to talk with the people that they had conversations with to see how the perceptions of the information that they received from the different leaders, if there was a difference in that? And even though someone might be having more conversations, maybe because they're less popular, they're less taken seriously. I don't know. I'm just curious.
Right. No, it's a great point. And I mean, one of my frustrations with this is that our measures of these, performance are very weak. We both don't have a sense of quality or how it was received, or really the measure of quantity too is a little bit weak. So not really. We don't have that much feedback on how it was. We've done a lot of qualitative work to understand the process of the intervention, and unfortunately some of that was done before we really analyzed these to be able to really probe these findings, but I would be interested to know whether those conversations are more effective when it wasn't the popular person or not. Thanks.
Do you think another study that might be interesting is to look at the person who is most popular within the group and looking at the influence their parents or their grandparents have in terms of starting those same conversations with them? And maybe another thing to consider is that if they don't have those conversations growing up, then they're not very comfortable having those conversations with all of their friends.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot that we can unpack here. Another kind of sub-level to that is it seems like if we dug a little further, the patterns that we might find for HIV and then the gender-based violence things could play out a little bit different. Because I think in this setting, there's a lot of talk for a long time about HIV and condom use and stuff. But the gender-based violence and the power and those things are just more springing up recently. So I bet we would find some different patterns there. But I agree, it'd be quite interesting.
I would like to know, did people basically cross boundary lines to go to another ward? And also, out of the 4 wards that you had, did one particular ward have a higher concentration of people infected with HIV, and were the conversations more prevalent there?
Those are great questions. For the first one, in terms of that crossing, network boundaries or ward boundaries, we did assess that. So we asked people, how often they went to another camp or another ward, and for all the camps in our network, we asked, how frequently they went. There was no one who was a member of multiple camps, but we did have a little bit of contamination, what we would call, or the crossing of boundaries, but not as much. So I will say that the selection of the 60 camps was a little bit more purposeful than I described. We took into account the clustering of those that were very close and didn't purposefully picked only one camp within a street, for example, because sometimes these wards were quite dense. But we are going to try to account for that. There were differences in some of these wards. So one of them is known as being the more high-risk one. We know that the HIV prevalence is a little bit higher. We know that movement out of that camp or out of that ward is more difficult, whereas there's another ward that's the population's a little bit older, is more substantial. And so we do see some differences by ward. And that's also something that our qualitative work is trying to unpack a little bit further. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much.